In October 2025, a car dressed up to look like a military vehicle drove to an intelligence compound a short walk from the presidential palace in Mogadishu and blew the building apart. Prisoners walked out into the street. That was not a raid on a remote outpost. That was the heart of the capital. Al-Shabaab now holds roughly a third of this country, runs its own courts, and collects more tax from ordinary Somalis than the government does. And its checkpoints sit on the roads leading into the city. Meanwhile, the African Union force that has stood between that group and Mogadishu for almost 20 years is packing up and going home. So here is the question worth arguing about in the comments. When those foreign troops are gone, can the Somali army hold its own capital? I will leave that for you to decide. This is everything it would have to do it with. We begin with tanks, M60 Patton. In February 1991, Marines drove these tanks through 2 belts of Iraqi minefields and out onto the open ground around Kuwait International Airport into the largest tank battle the Corps has ever fought. The M60 was already old. Everyone knew the Abrams was the better machine. So the Marines bolted reactive armor bricks onto the hulls and went in anyway. And by the time it was over, they had gutted an Iraqi armored division and barely lost a vehicle doing it. That was the last war an American crew ever fought and won. In February 2026, these came off a Turkish landing ship at the port of Mogadishu and rolled through the capital under escort, which means that for the first time since the state collapsed, there is a main battle tank on Somali streets with a Somali crew inside it. M48 Patton. Ben Het. March 1969, a North Vietnamese armored column came at an American Special Forces camp in the dark, and an M48 gunner, unable to see anything but muzzle flashes and unable to hear anything but engines, fired on sound and instinct and killed a PT-76 at close range. It is the only tank against tank fight of the entire Vietnam War. It lasted minutes. The M48 is older than most of the men crewing it today, and none of that matters to a fighter who has spent his whole war facing pickup trucks and has never had to think about armor plate before. M84. Yugoslavia built its own version of the T-72, and the hardest lesson that tank ever learned came at Vukovar in the autumn of 1991. The Yugoslav army expected to take the town in days. It got stuck there for 87 of them, losing armor street corner by street corner to men firing handheld rockets out of cellar windows. Good tank, wrong fight. Serbian instructors have been in Mogadishu training Somali crews on the modernized version, which puts a Balkan machine in the hands of an army that is going to use it in exactly the kind of city fight that mauled its ancestors. That brings us to the fighting vehicles and personnel carriers. Kirpi. Turkey built this because its soldiers kept dying on mountain roads in the southeast, blown apart by charges buried under the gravel that no flat-bottom truck could survive. Kirpi means hedgehog. The hull is a deep V, so the blast pushes out sideways instead of up through the floor plates, and the crew climbs out of something that would have killed every one of them in anything else. Somali units drove these through Mogadishu, escorting the tank convoy up from the port, which tells you which vehicle they trust when the road might be wired. Casper. Every mine-protected truck on Earth is a copy of a shape South African engineers worked out in the 1970s. Because their soldiers were being torn apart by mines in Angola and Namibia, and somebody finally decided to fix it instead of accepting it. They lifted the hull high off the ground, angled it into a V, and hung the crew compartment on top as a separate armored box. A Casper could eat a mine, lose a wheel, and still drive home. 2 decades later, when American troops started dying to roadside bombs in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Pentagon went looking for an answer and found that the South Africans had already written it down. Somalia runs the Descendants, the Mamba and the RG-31 and the Puma doing the same job on the same kind of road. Spartan. A Canadian company that builds armored vehicles in a factory in the United Arab Emirates will sell to just about anyone with a purchase order, which is how the same truck ends up in a government convoy in one country and a militia column in the next one over. Underneath the plate, it is a commercial chassis. It is cheap, it arrives fast, and any mechanic can keep it running. Nobody is ever going to write a song about it. It puts steel between a soldier and a rifle round. And out here, that is the entire job description, Saxon. Britain built this boxy thing for Northern Ireland, where the threat was not a tank, but a brick, a petrol bomb, and a device hidden in a culvert. It sits on a truck chassis, which makes it quick on a road and close to useless off one. When the British finally retired them, a batch went to Ukraine in 2015 and arrived in such rough shape that it turned into a small political scandal. Somali infantry still ride in them, decades after the streets they were built for went quiet. Bastion. Long distances, no roads worth the name, heat that kills engines, and an enemy who buries a charge and then waits a week. That is the Sahel. And that is the problem this French armored truck was designed around. French patrols pushed these across Mali for years on operations, where the nearest help was hours away by air. Everything about the vehicle assumes nobody is coming to get you quickly. Fiat 6614. Back when the Somali army was one of the largest on the continent and there were parades in Mogadishu, these little Italian armored cars ran its city patrols. Then 1991 happened. The armories were emptied, the barracks were stripped, and the entire arsenal was stolen, sold for scrap, or driven straight into a warlord's compound. A handful of these survived all of it. They are older than the war, older than the government that owns them, and they are still on the road. Technical. Here is a word this country gave the rest of the world. In the early 1990s, aid organizations working in Mogadishu were barred from bringing in their own security. So they hired local gunmen and paid them out of a budget line called technical assistance. And the armed pickups those men drove became known as technicals. The term went global. A warlord's strength was measured by how many he could put on the street. Mohammed Farah Aidid, the man whose militia fought the Rangers in October 1993, was carried to his own funeral in the bed of one. 30 years on, the Somali army still fights out of the back of a Toyota with a heavy gun bolted behind the cab, because it works and because nothing else gets to the fight faster. Next up is the engineering and support vehicles. M939 truck. Call it the 5-ton, and any American who has worn the uniform knows exactly what you mean. On the night of the 3rd of October, 1993, the ground convoy sent into Mogadishu to bring the Rangers out drove these trucks into a city that had become one continuous ambush. And what came back out had the beds full of wounded and the sheet metal punched through in 100 places. It is a truck. It has almost no armor, and it never pretended otherwise. It hauls the water, the ammunition, and the men. And when a fight goes wrong, it is the only way anybody is getting home. Moving on to artillery. Mortars. There is no gun line in this country. No howitzer park, no rocket batteries. Nothing that has to be towed into position and surveyed in. What there is instead is a tube in the back of a pickup, dropped onto a base plate, fired by a crew that can be gone before the first round lands. Al-Shabaab has walked mortar fire onto the airport and onto the government compound in Mogadishu for years, sometimes timing a salvo to the arrival of a visiting delegation. The army answers with the same weapon, because in a war fought between towns and roadblocks, the mortar is the only artillery that can keep up. That brings us to air defense. ALP-100G radar. Somalia has no missiles pointed at the sky. What landed at Mogadishu in February 2026, flown in on a Qatari transport, was a Turkish radar that can pick up aircraft, helicopters, drones, and cruise missiles coming in low and can trace a shell back to the ground it was fired from. Seeing something coming is not the same as being able to stop it. But every air defense network that has ever worked in the history of war started with somebody being able to see. Next up are the aircraft. Bayraktar TB2. In the autumn of 2020, Azerbaijan turned these cheap Turkish drones loose over Nagorno-Karabakh and then posted the gun camera footage online for anyone to watch. Tank after tank. Air defense vehicle after air defense vehicle. All of it dying on video in broad daylight with nothing in the sky to answer for it. That was the moment every army on Earth understood that the math had changed, that something costing a fraction of a fighter jet could take an armored force apart. Somalia flies them now, and so does Turkey, out of the same airfield, and the strikes have killed Al-Shabaab fighters. And on one night in March 2024, over a farm in Lower Shabelle, 23 civilians, most of them children, Bayraktar Akinci. Where the smaller drone loiters low and slow, this one climbs above anything an insurgent owns, stays up through the night, and carries the kind of weapons you would expect to see hanging off a fighter jet. Baykar built it because Turkey got tired of being told what it was and was not allowed to buy. Akinci means raider, after the light cavalry that used to ride out ahead of an Ottoman army burning whatever it found. The name is not subtle, neither is the aircraft. Circe 1, a small Turkish quadcopter, close enough to a hobby drone that you would not look twice until you noticed what is hanging underneath it. Somali commandos train with it now. Ukraine and Russia have spent years demonstrating what these things do to a man in a trench or a truck caught in the open. And that lesson has arrived here. A squad that owns the air over its own patrol sees the ambush before it happens. A squad that does not walks into it. T-129, attack, Mogadishu. The 2nd of July, 1993. Italian gunships called Mangusta were flying over a battle at a roadblock everyone knew as Checkpoint Pasta, named for the abandoned factory beside it. And one of them fired a Tau missile into a vehicle in the middle of a street fight that killed Italian soldiers below. That was the first war that airframe ever went to. Turkey later took the Italian design, rebuilt it with its own avionics and its own missiles, and called it the Attack. 3 decades after the grandfather flew over the city, the grandchild is back above the same streets, wearing Somali markings, T-70. Turkey builds the Black Hawk under license now, and a pair of them went to the Somali Navy. The airframe needs no introduction, but the story worth telling happened in Pakistan in May 2011, when a modified stealth version carrying American operators into Osama bin Laden's compound lost lift inside the walled courtyard and came down hard against the wall. Nobody died. The assault went ahead on foot, the crew left on the second aircraft, and the wreck was blown in place, all except the tail, which stayed behind in the dirt and told the entire world that a helicopter like that existed. That is the toughness people are paying for when they buy this airframe. Bell 412, a direct descendant of the Huey, which is to say a direct descendant of the sound an entire generation associates with being hurt and being pulled out. It moves troops, it moves cargo, and more than anything else, it moves the wounded. For the first time in a very long time, a Somali soldier hit on a road outside the capital has a real chance of being lifted out by his own air force instead of lying there waiting on somebody else's helicopter to be authorized. That brings us to the Navy. Onuk MRTP-16, Turkish-built, composite, hulled, and quick enough to run down anything a smuggler owns. The reason a boat like this matters here is the water it patrols. In April 2009, pirates out of these same waters boarded an American container ship, took the captain hostage in a covered lifeboat, and were killed by Navy snipers, firing from the fantail of a destroyer in a rolling sea. That was the high water mark of Somali piracy, and the answer to it was warships from a dozen navies parked off this coastline for years. Somalia is now trying to police that water with its own hulls. Response boat, small orange trimmed, and built for the United States Coast Guard after 2001 to guard harbors and put a boarding team onto a suspect vessel in a hurry. Underneath, it is a workboat with a gun mount, and one was handed to the Somali Coast Guard at a ceremony in Mogadishu. Ports are where the money is in this country. The money is what everybody has actually been fighting over the whole time. And finally, small arms, AK-47 and AKM. Nothing needs saying about this rifle that the last 80 years have not already said louder. What is worth saying is what it did to this specific country. When the government fell in 1991, the armories were thrown open, and a state that had built one of the biggest armies in Africa handed its rifles to everybody at once. Every faction, every clan militia, every kid, at every roadblock for the next 30 years was holding the same gun. That is a large part of why a war here has never really been able to end. MPT-76. Turkey carried a German rifle for decades and finally built its own, chambered for the heavier round because Turkish infantry fight in mountains and wanted the reach that comes with it. It was blooded in northern Syria. Somali troops trained at the Turkish base outside Mogadishu carry it now, which quietly makes it the standard rifle of the new army, M4 and M16. In 1967, Marines on the hills around Quezon were found dead beside their own rifles with the weapons stripped down and a cleaning rod jammed down the barrel because the ammunition they had been issued fouled the chamber and the spent case would not extract. Congress held hearings about it. The rifle got a chrome-lined chamber, different powder, and a forward assist, and it went on to fight every American war since. The Danav commandos carry it here, trained and paid for by the Americans, which has become a live problem now that Washington has started cutting the check. G3. After the Second World War, the German engineers who had been working on a roller-delayed rifle action scattered across Europe, and some of them ended up in Spain, finishing the design under a different name and a different flag. West Germany bought it back. Turkey then built it under license, by the million. And from there, it armed half the armies on the American side of the Cold War. It kicks like a mule. It is heavier than anything issued today, and it will still be firing long after a cleaner rifle has quit. Makarov. The sidearm of every Soviet officer from Havana to Kabul, and the pistol that came in the crate with every Soviet arms shipment sent into Africa. It is small, blunt, and almost impossible to break. There is very little to it, which is precisely why it survived a civil war that destroyed nearly everything else in this arsenal. Dragunov. Yevgeny Dragunov built target rifles for competition shooters before the army came to him with a different problem, and what he handed back was the first rifle in the world designed from scratch to put one good shooter in every squad instead of one sniper in every battalion. It is not a precision instrument, and it was never meant to be. It is a rifle that reaches out past where the rifleman can answer, carried by a man walking the same patrol as everybody else, and every army that has faced one has learned to hate the sound of it coming out of a tree line. PKM. Kalashnikov designed this one too, and it is a quiet masterpiece of doing more with less. It weighs noticeably less than the belt-fed guns the West carries, and it feeds from a non-disintegrating belt, which means the gunner strips each round backward out of the belt before it chambers, a trick inherited from guns that were already old when the Second World War started. It rides on the back of the truck, sits in the door of the helicopter, and holds down the corner of every position that matters. When a firefight opens up, this is the sound everybody is listening for. Dushka, the big Soviet 50 caliber, and the gun that taught Soviet helicopter crews to fear Afghanistan. Mujahideen fighters hauled these up onto ridgelines by mule, dug them in above the valleys, and shot down aircraft with them for years before a single American missile ever showed up. In Somalia, it has spent 3 decades bolted to the back of a pickup truck, and there is no weapon on Earth more closely tied to this country's wars than that silhouette. AGS-17. Soviet planners watched the Americans put an automatic grenade launcher to work in Vietnam, decided they wanted one of their own, and built this. It throws a stream of small grenades in a high arc, which lets it reach men behind a wall or down in a trench that no flat shooting gun can touch. Soviet crews bolted them into helicopter doorways over Afghanistan and hosed down ridgelines with them. Against fighters who shoot from behind cover and then vanish, it is one of the most useful things in this entire inventory. RPG. The 3rd of October, 1993. Somali fighters had worked out that American helicopters flared and slowed as they came over the target, and that a rocket fired from a rooftop at the right angle could reach the tail. 2 Black Hawks came down inside the city that afternoon. A raid meant to last an hour turned into a night that killed 18 Americans and hundreds of Somalis and reshaped American foreign policy for a decade. The launcher that did it is a tube, a trigger, and a rocket. It costs less than a rifle in most of the world, and it is still the first thing anybody in a fight like this reaches for.